Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to cilinixfxcapital and welcome to this brief new video I wanted to do ahead of the next week. Okay, so in this video I wanted to talk about 3 things that I think you need to keep a close eye on going into the next week. The next week, if we can believe, or if we can, if it is a little bit similar to the weeks we've had in the past, is most likely going to be very volatile. And it's most likely going to be crucial, as all the other weeks have been crucial as well. Although I must say the first week of November was actually less crucial. So we'll talk about that, so you actually can get a bit of a head start, or a bit of structure at least, going into such an important week, and so that you can also, quite quickly see what's going to happen with the week. Will we drop down lower? Something that I think at this point of time is less likely. I think it's quite likely we have formed a local bottom. That does not mean that we're going to rally. Outside of crashing, the other option is, of course, finding stability and maybe getting some bullish momentum. What I think is most likely, but that is very dependent as well on developments we will see in the next week. So that is what I wanted to talk about real quick right here. Now, the first thing that I think you need to keep an eye on, okay, so this will, you will already get a value in about, I think, 8 hours or so, when the APEC session starts, and that's the VIX, okay, the volatility index. Now, the volatility index is just a measure of the implied volatility of equities, okay? So the volatility index in itself doesn't really mean anything, but what it very often means, or at least what its movement says, is that if the volatility index goes up, that means more unrest, and that is bearish for the markets. If it goes down, that means less unrest, means more stability, market goes up. And what we have seen in the last couple of weeks is that on Friday, very often the volatility index drops down. It is still elevated. It's been in an uptrend since the 31st of October. Which is also what you can see right here. When a lot of the severe bearish pressure started, unrest increased, Bitcoin dropped down, Bitcoin started a massive downtrend. Since the volatility index is in an uptrend, Bitcoin has been in a 25% downtrend. Now, like I said, very often on Friday, the volatility index fell down. That's also what happened last Friday. So what will happen with the volatility index this Monday? What we have seen now, every time, if you take a look at Monday, well, not every time, it was actually 2 weeks ago it actually kept falling. But the week afterwards, we actually jumped up much higher on Tuesday. So early in the week, what will the volatility index do? Okay, will we see another increase for whatever reason, right? I mean, all the factors that matter for the markets are already priced into this. Okay, so the Russia-Ukraine piece, liquidity issues, which we'll talk about in a moment, everything is already in this. So if it decreases even further this Monday, Tuesday, that's bullish for the markets. If we see an increase again, that's bearish. Okay, and you can actually do some sort of technical analysis on this. That is a possibility, although it obviously matters a little bit less than with practical assets, equities, and gold. So that's the first thing you have to watch. You can see that on TradingView. I think you can also see that if you just type in the VIX. You can just look at it right here as well. The VIX, and you can see that after the open. Now, the second thing that I still care about, and it wasn't that much of a problem last week, but it's still liquidity, okay? Liquidity has been an issue in the United States in the last 2 months or so. So what I want you to keep an eye on as well, outside of the VIX, is 2 things, and that's repo operations and the SOFR spread. Now, the SOFR spread, you can go on TradingView, you can go to indicators, you can type that in, and what you'll be able to find, which I'll show you right now, is the SOFR spread. You'll be able to find a chart. You go to the daily time frame, you get this. If this, you want this to stay relatively low. Like I said, last week it actually was relatively low. It needs to stay relatively low. And then outside of that, and both of these will update when the New York session opens, also repo operations. Okay, so what you want to see, these would be signs of the liquidity situation becoming better. What you want to see is an SOFR spread that remains low, or maybe even gets negative, would be great. And you want to see no bar at the repo operations when you look that up. Okay, so this will be updated during the NYO. If that is the case, if we have no repo operations, if we have no SOFR spread, or it's relatively low, that is bullish. That means that there's no liquidity problems in the United States, and that would create more bullish momentum for risk on equities such as stocks, but also Bitcoin. So that's the second thing. If there will be repo operations, if the SOFR spread will increase, you will also see that with the volatility index. Okay, so the volatility index is basically the all-encompassing factor or variable that you can look at, and that takes into account everything. But obviously, you want to know why the volatility index is increasing. That gives you a better idea of what to watch for some recovery and when the volatility index is going to decrease. So far, we have two things. First of all, the volatility index. Second of all, the liquidity situation, which you can check with the SOFR spread and repo operations. And third of all, you just want a solid opening from crypto assets. If we go across the crypto assets right now, and if we look at relevant statistics, you can see the USDT dominance, which needs to be bearish, is at a critical resistance level. That's a good thing, all right? So that looks quite good. If you look at others, or the total three, so this is basically altcoins, those are close to significant support levels as well. Although I must add that like these are all altcoins bundled together, there seems to be a little bit more room to the downside for both of these. Okay, so be careful with altcoins. And the Bitcoin dominance is relatively bearish, which is a good thing for altcoins, but still, this doesn't really tell you much about the general state of the market. It tells you a little bit more about whether Bitcoin or altcoins are relatively strong. And then outside of that, equities are also at a very strong support level right here, which is another good thing, although the 4-hour time frame is in a downtrend, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. That is how it looks like right now. When we zoom out on Bitcoin, you can see that we have found strong support at this trend line and the point of control right here at 84,000. The third thing that I think you really need to keep an eye on is the open for Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been relatively strong over the course of today. Mostly, there is some bearish divergences though, and the volume is very low. It's quite likely we're also forming a CME gap to the downside. It's quite likely that we're going to pull back, either from here or from the point of control, a 7-day rolling VWAP combo between 88 and 89,000. We need to hold 84,000. 84,000 into 83,400. There we have a lot of support. We have the naked point of control. 84,000 is also at the trend line right here. It's a little bit higher, but still near the area. And it's the previous point of control of the range we had from February until April. That is the key level that, if this were a bottom for Bitcoin, a local bottom, which I do expect based on the fundamentals, but if it was a local bottom, we would get a strong reaction there. Okay, so it's likely we're going to tap that area. It's likely we're going to drop down, get a strong reaction there. That's a good sign that we can find a local bottom next week and maybe get some bullish momentum, get a weak reaction there or drop down below 84,000. And that significantly increases the chances that we will drop down lower into this previous level right here, around 77,000. But honestly, once we drop down into 77,000, we can drop down lower as well. So my personal thoughts going into next week, based on the fundamental close last week, but also based on the technicals for Bitcoin, is that we will be able to form a local bottom. So something like this. I don't expect a massive rally or a bull run, but I do think we're forming a local bottom. But like I said, that can be invalidated if we see a bullish volatility index, if we see major liquidity issues, or if we see a breakdown below 83,500. So if you know that, you have a little bit more of a preparation and you are a little bit more ready for next week, hopefully. So hopefully it helps, but those are my thoughts for now. That's what I think you need to know. I'll see you all in my next videos. Take care and bye.